In Death Note, Light is a charismatic, silver-tongued young man, capable of manipulating everyone around him to suit his cause. His targets in fact become so charmed that they even begin to worship him as a god. Now, what do you think happens to a man who is treated like a god? Kira worship can hardly be called anything other than a cult following. Charles Manson, Jim Jones, David Koresh, Light Yagami. What do these names have in common? They're all leaders of cults based around themselves. So to understand the mind of a man treated like a god, it may serve to look at some real-world examples. The primary comparison to be made between Light and the average cult leader is that manipulative personality that I mentioned earlier. It's a necessary characteristic of a cult leader to be charismatic, to know what to say and how to say it to get people on your side. Without that level of charisma, these people's ideas would be totally ridiculous, and they would garner no following. For example, Charles Manson's preaching spoke of an inevitable race war between white and black people, which he dubbed Helter Skelter, that the black people would inevitably win. However, they'd have no idea how to lead themselves, according to Manson, so they'd have to turn to whatever white people remained to lead their society. His plan was for his group to hide out to survive the race war, and take over when things cooled off. These ideas seem ridiculous to us, but Manson was capable of gaining like-minded followers who would believe his view of the world. He could convince them that his predictions were prophetic. Alternatively, Light propagated the idea that killing bad people would eventually create a world where everyone was good and kind-hearted. While this idea seems ridiculous to some, the majority of the world has already accepted that some criminals should be killed because of the severity of their crimes. Because of the fact that Light is doing work that many people already agree should be done for the betterment of the world, his overall ideology is more palatable to a wider population than any other cult leader in reality or fiction. Cultists often become loyal enough to their leaders to be willing to kill or die for their sake. For an example of this, we need look no further than Jim Jones's cult, the People's Temple. He was able to convince his congregation to move out of the United States to essentially create his own city. When U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan flew out to Jonestown, as he called it, to meet with Jim Jones, his followers took Congressman Ryan's life, and the lives of many of those that came with him, because they, Jones and his supporters, thought that he was a threat to their lifestyle. Between Misa, Takada, and Mikami, thousands of human beings were likely killed in Kira's name, in an attempt to help move towards Kira's goal. The Manson family was also willing to kill to further their plan. They attacked and killed white people and attempted to frame the black community for their crimes in attempts to ignite the race war. These cultists are unstable people, and once they've latched onto an ideology they agree with, it becomes the thing that matters most to them. The mission becomes worth more than any human life. That's why Jim Jones was able to convince his followers to upend their lives to join him on a pilgrimage out of the United States, and why Misa Amane and Teru Mikami were both more than willing to kill innocent people to help Light. Misa was even willing to kill her own friend at a moment's notice. It's also a common thread of many cults that have incited violence to have ties to the Christian religion. David Koresh was believed to be the son of God by some of his followers. Similarly, Light had always intended to become the god of the New World. This, I think, is a look into the true goals of these cult leaders. Whatever they claim to believe, what they all seem to want is idolization and power. They all want to wield power over as many people as they can, and they just use whatever means they can to attain that power. In Light's case, he found a notebook that could kill people so long as he knew their name and face. How could he take over the world with something like that? Well, there are probably a lot of options here, but one of them would be to garner public favor by killing people that the public disagrees with to establish the killer as a public figure, while also demonstrating his ability to threaten anyone in the world, including any world leaders that oppose him, as acceptance for his ideals slowly grows in the back of the public's mind. Now, Light never explicitly admits that this is his real goal, but I think it is. After all, if he really agreed with what he was doing deep down inside of himself, then would Light without his memories really want to catch Kira, or to support him? Clearly he would want to support him, but as soon as someone who isn't him or one of his followers has the power of Kira, his thoughts are, he's evil, we have to stop him. This indicates to me that the goal of curing the world of evil isn't actually what Light cares about at all. Like all cult leaders, he just wants power. Unlike other cult leaders though, Light actually has power that the average man can't have. He has the Death Note, an instrument that can truly turn him into God, if he plays his cards right. However, this type of idolatry has its effects on the idol. Their egos often become inflated. Light began to speak down to Ryuk, a god of death, like an underling. He underestimated his enemies, insisting that no one could be as worthy his opponent as L, who he had beaten, implying that no one could ever beat him. Light also placed little value in the lives of other people. There are plenty of times when Light contemplates killing those close to him just to avoid suspicion. He likely would have killed Misa, for example, the first time she was arrested. He even considered killing his younger sister and his father, and when his father did die, his inner monologue revealed little care for his loss. As long as it was to protect himself and his interests, he didn't care who else had to die. In episode 9 of the series, we see L confront Light in person for the first time, After their exchange, throughout which Light manages to keep a straight face, he returns to his room and has an outburst of rage, feeling more cornered by L than he ever had before. This is where some of that talking down to Ryuk that I had mentioned earlier happens as well. What really evokes anger in Light here is a feeling of powerlessness. He's supposed to be the god of the new world, who can kill anyone he desires at any time. Yet here sits his greatest opposition right in front of him, and he knows that he can't do anything about it. His inability to act is what sets him off. We see similar breakdowns in cult leaders who feel the noose tightening around their necks as well. Because they're raised to such a high pedestal and their followers expect them to never fail and lead them all down the righteous path, they begin to crack under the pressure like Light did. The most obvious example is again Jim Jones. As we see in the documentary Jonestown, the fear of his dreams slipping away from him and the loss of the power he had gained over his subjects turned him to substance abuse, and the altered state of mind led to violent outbursts and an array of suicidal thoughts. Ultimately, he decided to order that his followers join him in his suicide attempt by drinking poison, and any who resisted were forcibly killed. In the end, he even had a loyal follower shoot him in the head rather than take his own life. Unlike Jones, Light never actually wanted to die, but the willingness to sacrifice the lives of those who were loyal to him, like writing Kiyomi Takada's name in his own scrap of the Death Note stored in his watch, is a disposition he does share with Jones, like most cult leaders. The only difference is that Jim Jones's following is treated more like a cult, while Kira's following is treated more like a religion. Channels like Sakura TV refer to Kira as a god, and have their hosts dress in holy garments. Because of the supernaturality of Kira's heinous crimes, they're treated like acts of God. He can kill anyone at any time from anywhere, and he righteously judges the guilty and punishes them. But what Kira supporters don't know is that Kira is really just Light, and Light Yagami is just a man. Granted, he's a genius who's intellectually on par with the greatest detective in the world, but he's still less than a god. We see proof of this in the final episode of the series. When he was finally proven to be Kira to those who had trusted him throughout the entire series, his response was, "So what?" When everything he had built came crashing down, the usually cool, collected Light Yagami began to lash out in anger at both the agents that were about to arrest him and Terumikami, his loyal follower, and even broke down in tears. This isn't the first time we begin to see the cracks either. He had built his position up so high in his own mind that he truly believed himself to be a god. He thought he was untouchable. The rude awakening that he was, to use Nier's words, nothing more than a crazy serial killer, broke any shred of sanity Light had left. But in truth, Light was more than just a crazy serial killer. He was a crazy cult leader. Or maybe you're a Kira supporter. If you are, feel free to tear me a new one in the comments for being a heretic. Or whatever. I think Light's a very interesting character, and I love talking about Death Note, so I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say. Whether you love Light or hate him, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to our channel and stay tuned for next week. If you want more Death Note content, feel free to check out our last video about the series which talks about the ramifications of Whammy's house.